Cecily Bloom looked rather irritable. He didn't like first nights, and this one in particular had started badly. He had a nasty feeling about it. He much preferred playing the hero, where he had the sympathy of the audience, and in this play he was the villain. Being the first night of the play, he wasn't at all sure of some of his lines. To make matters worse, he had arrived at the theatre only to discover that the prompt boy was missing, and there was no one else to take his place. Then there was a disturbance in the stalls just before the curtain went up, something to do with a marmalade sandwich, so the stage manager had said. Of course, this was all nonsense, but still it was very disturbing. And then there was a noisy crowd in the box. He sighed to himself. It was obviously going to be one of those nights. But if Cecily Bloom's heart was not in the play, Paddington certainly was. He soon forgot about his wasted sixpence and devoted all his attention to the plot. He decided quite early on that he didn't like Cecily Bloom, and he stared at him long and hard through his opera glasses. He followed his every move, and when, at the end of the first act, Cecily, in the part of the hard-hearted father, turned his daughter out into the world without a penny, Paddington stood up in his chair and waved his programme indignantly at the stage. Paddington was a surprising bear in many ways, and he had a strong sense of right and wrong. As the curtain came down, he placed his opera glasses firmly on the ledge and climbed off his seat. "Are you enjoying it, Paddington?" asked Mr. Brown. "It's very interesting," said Paddington. He had a determined note in his voice, and Mrs. Brown looked at him sharply. She was beginning to recognise that tone, and it worried her. "Where are you going, dear?" she asked as he made for the door of the box. "Oh, just out for a walk," said Paddington vaguely. "Well, don't be too long," she called as the door closed behind him. "You don't want to miss any of the second act." "Oh, don't fuss, Mary," said Mr. Brown. "I expect he just wants to stretch his legs or something. He's probably just going to the bathroom." But at the moment Paddington was going, not in the direction of the bathroom, but towards the door leading to the back of the theatre. It was marked private, artists only. As he pushed the door open and passed through, he immediately found himself in an entirely different world. There were no red plush seats. Everything was bare. Lots of ropes hung down from the roof. Pieces of scenery were stacked against the walls, and everyone seemed in a great hurry. Normally Paddington would have been most interested in everything, but now he had a purposeful look on his face. Seeing a man bending over some scenery, he walked over and tapped him on the shoulder. "Excuse me," he said, "can you tell me where the man is?" The scene man went on working. "Man," he said. "What man?" "The man," said Paddington patiently. "The nasty man." "Oh, you mean Sir Seeley." The scene hand pointed towards the long corridor. "He's in his dressing room. You better not go disturbing him, because he's not in a very good mood." He looked up. "Hey," he cried, "you're not supposed to be in here. Who are you? Let you in." Paddington was too far away to answer, even if he had heard. He was already halfway up the corridor, looking closely at all the doors. Eventually he came to one with a large star on it and the words Cecily Bloom in big gold letters. Paddington drew a deep breath and then knocked loudly. There was no reply, so he knocked again. Still, there was no reply, and so, very cautiously, he pushed open the door with his paw. "Go away," said a booming voice. "I don't want to see anyone." Paddington peered around the door. Cecily Bloom was lying stretched on a long couch. He looked tired and cross. He opened one eye and gazed at Paddington. "I'm not signing any autographs," he growled. "Don't want your autograph," said Paddington, fixing him with a hard stare. "I wouldn't want your autograph if I had my autograph book, and I don't have my autograph book, so there." Cecily sat up. "You don't want my autograph," he said in a surprised voice. "But everyone always wants my autograph." "Well, I don't," said Paddington. "I've come to tell you to take your daughter back." He gulped the last few words. The great man seemed to have grown in about twice the size he'd been on stage, and he looked like he was going to explode any minute. Cecily clutched his forehead. "You want me to take my daughter back," he said at last. "That's right," said Paddington firmly, "and if you don't, I expect she can come and stay with Mr. and Mrs. Brown." Cecily Bloom ran his hand distractedly through his hair, then pinched himself. "Mr. and Mrs. Brown," he repeated in a dazed voice. He looked wildly round the room and then dashed to the door. "Sarah," he called in a loud voice. "Sarah, come in here at once." He backed round the room until he had placed the couch between himself and Paddington. "Keep away, bear," he said dramatically, then peered at Paddington, for he was rather short-sighted. "You are a bear, aren't you?" he added. "That's right," said Paddington from darkest Peru. Cecily looked at his woolen hat. "Well, then," he said crossly, playing for time, "you ought to know better than wear a green hat in my dressing room. Don't you know green is a very unlucky colour in the theatre? Take it off at once." "It's not my fault," said Paddington. "I wanted to wear my proper hat." He just started to explain all this about his hat when the door burst open and the lady called Sarah entered. Paddington immediately recognised her as Sir Celie's daughter in the play. "It's all right," he said. "I've come to rescue you." "You've what?" The lady seemed most surprised. "Sarah," Sir Celie Bloom came out from behind his couch. "Sarah, protect me from this mad bear." "I'm not mad," said Paddington indignantly. "Then kindly explain what you are doing in my dressing room," boomed the great actor. Paddington sighed. Sometimes people were very slow to understand things. Patiently, he explained it all to them. When he'd finished, the lady called Sarah threw her head back and laughed. "Glad you think it's funny," said Sir Celie. "Oh, but darling, don't you see?" she said. "It's a great compliment. Paddington really believes you are throwing me out into the world without a penny. It shows what a great actor you are." Sir Celie thought for a moment. He said gruffly. "Quite an understandable mistake, I suppose. He looks a remarkably intelligent bear, come to think of it." Paddington looked from one to the other. "Then you're only acting all the time," he faltered. The lady bent down and took his paw. "Of course, darling, but it was very kind of you to come to my rescue. I shall always remember it." "Well, I would have rescued you if you wanted it," said Paddington. Sir Celie coughed. "Are you interested in the theatre, bear?" he boomed. "Oh, yes," said Paddington, "very much, except I don't like having to pay sixpence for everything. I want to be an actor when I grow up." The lady called Sarah jumped up. "Why, Celie, darling," she looked at Paddington. "I've an idea," she whispered in Sir Celie's ear, and then Sir Celie looked at Paddington. "It's a bit unusual," he said thoughtfully, "but it's worth a try." "Yes, it's certainly worth a try." In the theatre itself, the interval was almost at an end, and the Browns were getting restless. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Brown, "I wonder where he's got to." "If he doesn't hurry up," said Mr. Brown, "he's going to miss the start of the second act." Just then there was a knock on the door, and an attendant handed a note to Mr. Brown. "A young bear gentleman asked me to give you this," he announced. "He said it was very urgent." Thank you," said Mr. Brown, taking the note and opening it. "What does it say?" asked Mrs. Brown anxiously. "Is he all right?" Mr. Brown handed her the note to read. "Your guess is as good as mine," he said. Mrs. Brown looked at it. It was hastily written in pencil, and it said, "I've been given a very important job. Paddington. P.S. I'll tell you about it later." "Now, what on earth can that mean?" said Mrs. Brown. "Trust something unusual to happen to Paddington." "I don't know," said Mr. Brown, settling back in his chair as the lights went down, "but I'm not going to let it spoil the play." "I hope the second half is better than the first," said Jonathan. "I thought the first half was rotten. That man kept forgetting his lines." The second half was much better than the first. From the moment Sir Celie strode onto the stage, the theatre was electrified. A great change had come over him. He no longer fumbled over his lines, and people who had coughed all through the first half now sat up in their seats and hung onto his every word. When the curtain finally came down on the end of the play, with Sir Celie's daughter returning to his arms, there was a great burst of applause. The curtain rose again, and the whole company bowed to the audience. Then it rose while Sir Celie and Sarah bowed, but still the cheering went on. Finally, Sir Celie stepped forward and raised his hand for quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for your kind applause. We are indeed most grateful. But before you leave, I'd like to introduce the youngest and most important member of our company, a young bear who came to our rescue." The rest of Sir Celie's speech was drowned in the buzz of excitement as he stepped forward to the very front of the stage, where a small screen hid a hole in the boards, which was the prompt box. He took hold of Paddington's paws and pulled. Paddington's head appeared through the hole. In his other paw he was grasping a copy of the script. "Come along, Paddington," said Sir Celie. "Come and take your bow." "I can't," gasped Paddington. "I think I'm stuck." And stuck he was. It took several stagehands, the fireman, and a whole lot of butter to remove him after the audience had gone. But he was far enough out to twist round and raise his hat to the cheering crowd before the curtain came down for the last time. Several nights later, anyone going into Paddington's room would have found him sitting in bed with his scrapbook, a pair of scissors, and a pot of paste. He was busy pasting in a picture of Sir Celie Bloom, which the great man had signed, to Paddington with grateful thanks. There was also a signed picture from the lady called Sarah, and one of his proudest possessions, a newspaper cutting about the play headed "Paddington Saves the Day." Mr. Gruber had told him that the photographs were probably worth a bit of money, but after much thought he decided not to part with them. In any case, Sir Celie Bloom had given him his sixpence back and a pair of opera glasses.